So let's have a big girl conversation. When was the last time you looked at a circumstance you were in, a difficulty, a challenge, a painful experience, and thought, oh my goodness, why is this happening to me? Why is this happening? What is going on? Why am I here? And didn't ask, what is it supposed to be teaching me? Thank you for joining me again for the Girl Just Feel podcast, where faith meets mental health and healing starts with feeling your feelings. I'm your host, Dr. Ajane Gaylor, and I would love if you would subscribe and share the podcast. I've been enjoying meeting you here, sharing my heart, and I hope that you have been enjoying being here too. Can I tell you something? Yeah. When I got married, I had no idea what was to come. I think I may have confessed this many times on the show in the past, but maybe back when it was called the Experience Freedom Podcast. I think I might have told you that I didn't want to get married or have children. Yes, I know. Sounds horrible. There are so many women who would love to be in my position and have a family and be married, all the wonderful things. And I am blessed to be in my position. But let me just confess, as a, teen, 20 something who had experienced my own level of pain and difficulty. My parents got divorced when I was younger, and I wasn't interested. And I was making that conclusion mainly because of my own pain, right? My disappointment, things that I didn't think went right. And I wanted to avoid at all costs that kind of pain. I didn't want to mess up any kids' lives, so I didn't want to have any children. And I didn't want to get married because I didn't really understand the impact of marriage, how to be in a successful marriage, and I just didn't want no parts. So I remember when I met my husband. Actually, we had met a couple of times before we actually met for real, and remembered each other seriously. His sister and I went to college together, and we sang in the choir together. And I also attended college with friends that he went to high school with. So we had a lot of mutual friends that we didn't even know about until much later. So backtracking a little bit, I meet him for the first time just on a whim. His parents used to own a bakery. And so a friend of mine, we were home for Christmas break, and we decided to go see our friend who was, his sister, at the bakery that they worked at. We just were going to stop by. And so we stopped by to see her, and her two brothers happened to come in the door. So that was the first time I met him, but I didn't remember him. I didn't remember his name. Like, it was just a fly by night kind of thing. Fast forward a few months, we're on tour, concert choir. We're on tour in New York, which we did every spring break. We would tour, go to different places and sing. And he comes to New York on his spring break to just, be there to hang out. And so he happens to join us on the tour for one of the days we were at one of the events. And so I knew who he was connected to. I knew that was our brother, but again, didn't remember his name. I don't even think we spoke to each other that day. Like, when he came to the concert, he actually had his eye on a different girl. So fast forward several more months later, we are back to campus early for choir, because the choir and the band would come early so we could get started, and the football team. So we could get started on practice. And he brought, it was his mother, himself, his sister, who was my college friend, and his other younger brother were all there. And we ran into them at the Walmart. So in the tiny little town that I went to school in, I went to a HBCU in Kentucky. And in the tiny little town we were in, Walmart was like our mall. It was like the place to be. So for whatever reason, my roommates and I, which were some of his high school friends, were with me, and we were kind of hanging out. And I'm going down the aisle, and I think it's either him or his brother. And I'm like, they look familiar. But of course, I don't remember his name, any of that. So we ended up running into each other in the Walmart. His sister, some of my roommates, me, and my roommate was high school friends with him. They actually grew up at the same church, so they had known each other all of their lives. And, a couple other folks, and we're all kind of just congregating in the aisle. And I see him standing there, and I'm like, you don't remember me, do you? Because I'm like, I know that's her brother. I know enough to know that that's her brother. I don't remember his name. So I ask him, you don't remember me, do you? And of course, he tried to play it off and pretend like, oh, yeah, and he's like, yeah, what's your name again? And I don't think he knew at all who I was. But because I was kind of with some people that were familiar to him, he was trying to maybe conclude who I might be. And so he's like, yeah, what's your name again? And I was like, basically, you don't know who I am. So, of course, he runs into the high school / childhood church friend, and they start chatting. We all kind of end up in the aisle together, chit chatting, whatever. His mother, brother, and sister eventually join us, and it's just a thing. And then I move on. We go back to my apartment. My friends were going to come over, and we were going to kind of hang out a little bit in my apartment. Next thing I know, I get a phone call from my friend, who's his sister, saying, hey, we want to basically come over. And I'm like, sure, you guys can come on over. And I find out much later, after, of course, me, because we're married now, this is my husband, so I'm telling you the story. He convinced her to reach out to me to see if we could connect, because he was interested. So I find out way, 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 way later that when he saw me in the Walmart, his conclusion was, that's going to be my wife. Now, it was a bumpy road for us to get started, but very fast and quick. And God really blew me away with how all of that came to be. And I tell you this story because my heart had been so turned off even to relationships at that point. And I had already experienced some very painful, difficult relationships in college, some failures of mine that I had done, some mistakes I had made, some people I had wounded. And I wasn't interested in carrying on with any relationships. As a matter of fact, when I turned, I believe I was 19, when I rededicated myself to the Lord. Now, I told you on the last episode that I gave my life to Christ when I was 7 years old. And I was sincere, and I knew what I was doing, and I was very clear that I wanted to be saved. But I didn't understand the process of sanctification. And that's just a big theological word to say, going through some stuff so that you can be more like Jesus. And what that means is enduring tests, enduring trials, enduring difficulties, and getting your character worked on so that you can reflect Christ and not your sinful self. So I'm, just turning, I think I was 19, and I had rededicated myself to the Lord. I learned to fast and to pray for the first time. Like, I knew how to pray, but I had begun to study scriptures differently than I had ever done before. I learned more about fasting and that spiritual discipline. I learned more about intentional prayers. And so I started to grow and mature because I had just had 3 years of college life where I was acting a plumb fool. So there was a lot that I had to lay down. There were some confessions that I had to make, some sins that I had to do away with, some behaviors that were compromising. And even with all of the transformation I had been experiencing, and, it wasn't pretty, it wasn't perfect at all, but I still carried this tinge of pain in my heart that I didn't want to have a marriage. I did not want to be vulnerable to a relationship, and I didn't want to experience that pain of someone letting me down or having to work through issues. And I just did not want to get married. So when I met my husband in the Walmart, with no expectations of that turning into more than just a chance encounter, fast forward to us getting connected, and because this was back in the day when we had email, and nights and weekends were free on the cell phone, but if you called long distance during the day, it was going to cost you. So we mainly had means of communicating via email and that kind of thing. And so that's kind of how it started, and then it quickly turned into an engagement, and then of course into a marriage. And how do you determine that, oh, she changed her mind, she decided she wanted marriage, and then got married? No, 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 no. To be as transparent and honest as I can be, I still, even after I met my husband and knew 100% for sure that this is who God was, connecting me with, and this was going to be my spouse, I still didn't want it. Okay, let's just be real. I still was not interested. I said yes because I felt like this was God's will. Based on my experience, based on my 20 something year old mind and and encounters, I believed that this is who God was showing me was supposed to be my spouse. This is who he was aligning me with. He had given me a dream. And I really felt strongly that, okay, Lord, this is what you want me to do. And so I said yes out of obedience. Now, don't get me wrong, because I'm sure a lot of you are thinking, well, she don't even love the man. I do love him. And love is a choice. And listen, we'll have to talk about love on a different show. But today, what I want to talk about is the fact that I didn't want it at all. And there are some days when I even question why I did it, right? But I trusted that God was leading me, that he was guiding me. And even if I had gotten it wrong, he would still be with me in it. So, why do I tell you why that I didn't want to get married? Because when tests and trials came up, and when we started having difficulties early on, and when we would have our challenges, because all relationships are going to have challenges, right? I kept going back to the idea that I didn't want this to begin with. So, it must be something that I did. It must be something that it must be because I went along with it. And so it's my fault. It's my fault that we are challenging each other in these areas. It's my fault that we're having, disagreements. It's my fault that things aren't working because I went against what I wanted. And that I've come to understand is untrue. It was very challenging for me to say yes to the Lord, to do something that I believe he called me to do, and then endure difficulty along the way. I had it all wrong. And maybe you don't deal with it in the way that I did, but I thought because this was God's idea, because it sure wasn't mine, to get married and then, of course, eventually have children, that all things were going to work out well and that everything was going to go my way and that I wouldn't have any challenges. Can anybody relate to that? Or is it just me? It must be just me who thought that because I'm saying yes to God, then everything should be peachy, right? When we give our lives to the Lord and when we follow after him and we obey God, everything's going to be peachy. It's going to be perfect. It's going to be wonderful. And I'm never going to struggle ever again or have any challenges. Well, that is something that I think our enemy and even our flesh, because our flesh likes to be comfortable, may have manufactured in order to minimize the impact of enduring difficulty and growing. Growing. That's what I want to say. Now, a few episodes back, I talked about what stress actually is. So, we talked about in the past that stress is basically saying there's a need, there's a demand that we don't yet have the capacity to meet, which creates that sense of stress. But if we can meet it, it means that we can grow. And what I didn't understand at the time was just because I felt like this was what God was leading me to do and I was following his plans and I was being obedient to what he was telling me to do, even though it wasn't what I wanted to do. And honestly, all the reasons why I didn't want to do that had to do with my pain, had to do with my disappointment, had nothing to do with his goodness or sovereignty or even whether or not my husband was a great man, which he is. But it had to do with me trying to avoid or trying to prevent or trying to control what I felt would be the outcome of my life. But just because we face something difficult and challenging that may stretch us or expose a need does not mean that something's wrong. As a matter of fact, it may mean that everything is absolutely right. So there isn't necessarily, and sometimes it is, sometimes what we go through is a result of decisions we made, and we are experiencing the consequences of those decisions, whatever they are. Sometimes it is on us. We do have a responsibility for where we are. But sometimes It ain't got nothing to do with you, or it didn't start with you. It's somebody else's choices, somebody else's decisions, somebody else's actions that have led to you experiencing what you're experiencing. But that does not always mean that you are in sin, you did something wrong, and so now this is the result. Most of the time, and a lot of the time, if you are not in blatant disobedience, you know, it can just simply be because God is trying to grow you up. So let's have a big girl conversation. When was the last time you looked at a circumstance you were in, a difficulty, a challenge, a painful experience, and thought, oh my goodness, why is this happening to me? Why is this happening? What is going on? Why am I here? And didn't ask, what is this supposed to be teaching me? I'm guilty. I'm guilty. Literally this morning, I was doing the same. Why, Lord, why? And there's nothing wrong with us asking God why. There's nothing wrong with us wanting to understand. That's a part of us learning what the need is. That's a part of us understanding, oh, there's a demand that don't have the resources to meet yet. And I may need to stretch. I may need to grow. I may need to expand. And the outcome is going to be, again, that word growth. But I think, at least for myself, what really was behind my desire to prevent marriage and prevent motherhood was my desire to control what would happen. So I say yes to the Lord. My husband and I get married, and then we start having problems. Financial problems, housing problems, job problems, parenting problems, physical health problems. I mean, my problems with my health started before we got married, but boy, oh boy, did they explode and accelerate as the years went on. So had I looked at the circumstances to determine whether or not I was where I was supposed to be, anyone looking from the outside would have said, girl, no, you are nowhere you're supposed to be. This is wrong. Get out, run, move on. No. But that's not what God was trying to reveal. Actually, it was a process of growth and sanctification and maturity and healing that was necessary. And that's why he allowed what he allowed. And if I had continued, and if I do continue to conclude that because there is a challenge, because there are circumstances that are difficult, because there is pain, then that means something is not right, then I am going to continue to circumvent the very process that God is desiring to use to build me up into the full, mature woman that I'm supposed to be. Let me just expose some lies that I believed before I got married and became a mom. Trying to be a good Christian woman, trying to honor the Lord and honor my husband and raise my children and take care of my home. I believed this lie that I had to do it all myself. I didn't even know I was thinking that. I just behaved like somebody who felt like they had to do it all themselves. And I'm not saying that that absolved me from my responsibility to my husband and to my children and to my home. But somewhere along the way, I picked up this idea that if I want it done right, I have to do it myself. How many of you can relate to that statement? And I carried on like somebody who felt like I had to do it all myself. So even if my husband was trying to help me, or even when there were times that my children came of age and were old enough to start helping out and participating, there was still this belief driving my behavior, leading me to say, y'all not doing it good enough. I need to do it myself. Or if I would ask for help and the help didn't show up the way I wanted it to, then I would make the conclusion, oh, see, I do have to do it myself. There isn't anybody to help me. Nobody's going to do it right. So that lie led to a lot of tension and friction for me and my spouse in our relationship, in my parenting relationship, in our home, and even in myself. Because if I'm going around thinking I have to do it all on my own, and this lie is leading me to respond to what my husband was doing or not doing, or what my children were doing or not doing, or what I felt wasn't happening, then that driver led me to then respond and behave in a way that said I have to take on more than I should. I have to endure more than I need to. I have to carry more than I can really hold. And then that caused even more symptoms, issues, all the things, right? So I'm going to give you the advice that I would go back and give my 20 something year old self when I didn't want to get married or have children out of my own pain and my own controlling tendencies. I would tell her, you don't have to do it all yourself because you were never designed to carry this alone. The truth is, we were made for relationship, first with God and then with one another. How we know this is because the way Jesus responded to the two greatest commandments was to first love God with all of who you are, and then to love your neighbor as yourself. And you're not left out of that, because in order to love your neighbor, you have to love yourself. And before you can love yourself, you would have to love God. So there's some formula there. But we were made to be in community, and we were made to share this life with other people. My effort or my desire to not get married or have children was because I was carrying pain from relationships that I had had prior to that. In my family of origin, in the divorce of my parents, and the abuse I endured. And so I decided that in order to protect myself from further harm, it was easier to not be in relationship. So two of the relationships that most people, not all people, but most people are seeking is a marital relationship and a parenting relationship. They want to get married and have kids. Some people do, some people don't. But I wanted to prevent any more pain, any more harm, any more difficulty by not having those relationships. And I also, in turn, didn't want to cause anybody pain, anybody difficulty, anybody any harm. And so my remedy for that was a counterfeit to what God really wanted me to experience. And I hope that me confessing it to you will help you to examine ways and areas where you've come up with a counterfeit. And as a matter of fact, that's your life work. What counterfeits have you created in your own life? What are some conclusions you have come to where you've decided what you will or won't do out of your own pain in order to prevent an outcome you didn't expect? Write that down. I'm big on writing things down. So write it down, pour over it, pray about it, and I'll see you next time.